intercultural understanding and its application to diplomatic, commercial, and community contexts. Andrew is globally focused and progressive, executive-level leader, bringing a strategic mindset to sports diplomacy and the opportunities it presents to progress international relations. He has played a pioneering role in the development of the Australian Football League partnership with China through the Port Adelaide Football Club. Andrew is a published writer and engaging speaker on sports diplomacy and its underutilized role in facilitating positive cultural exchange.
Good day. My name is Andrew Hunter, and it's a great privilege to be able to speak to the Global Education and Scholarship Summit for Africa. When I was asked first to make a short presentation at this event, I wanted to first start with why such an event is important. Why is global education and scholarship important? And why is it important for Australia to participate, to have a voice in the Global Education and Scholarship Summit for Africa? And thinking about this and reflecting on the importance of the event, I really think that education brings far more than degrees for students and economic benefits for the receiving country, although often education and international education is couched in these terms. For me, education and international education contributes strongly to an intercultural understanding, which is critical to all forms of international engagement. The intercultural engagement that comes from being an international student, of studying in a different country, and also of the home students interacting with the international students, for me, is critically important. And those understandings are useful in international business, international diplomacy, and indeed in all forms of international engagement. And I also think that networks are important. The networks that you develop as an international student can stay with you for your entire career, indeed for your entire life. For me, it is these sort of connections that can enhance a bilateral relationship between one country and the other, because there is an understanding and a network connection that comes from being a student, of having friendships that develop in your time studying in another country that you can call upon as you work your way through your career, whether it be in business or government or ultimately diplomacy. So for me, there are many reasons why we should encourage and value international education. Then I thought why I would potentially modestly contribute to this. And so I think it's important to describe my experiences as an international student. I was very briefly an international student almost 20 years ago to the day. Actually, I was a student at the International University of Japan, the International Relations Department, on exchange, and I was there to write my honours thesis about this relationship between Australia and Japan and the contribution the two countries made to the multilateral infrastructure in the Asian region. The International University of Japan was set at the foot of the Japanese Alps, Yukikuni, as it's described in Japanese, snow country. And it was an extraordinary experience, one that will stay with me throughout my entire life. And the friendships and the understandings and the connections made during that very beautiful moment in my life will stay with me forever and has really informed my worldview. And it's something that I carry with me, both in my personal life, but also in my professional life. These that were cherished memories, looking out in the second story of the library at the snow-covered expanse, which I found so beautiful and calming. It felt to me the way you would look at your loved one as she sleeps. It was just a really calming moment and an opportunity to really think and develop a worldview that, again, largely stays with me today. And then why would an Australian be invited to discuss international and global education and the scholarship summit that's being held in Africa? Well, very recently, my professional career took me to Africa as a place which I've dreamed, understanding its diversity, understanding its extraordinary nature. And so my journey is a reasonably recent one. And in the 12 months leading into that, knowing that engagement with Africa would be important to me and imminent, I went about understanding a little of the continent, its history. I engaged with it through literature. I met extraordinary people, Desiree Mateus, who works in the Namibian's President's Office, that set up a literary group. I spoke with people that I happen to know in Australia, J.M. Coetzee, and through him took a real interest and fascination in Gerner, the latest Nobel Prize winner for literature. So I started my engagement in your wonderful continent and its constituent countries, peoples, and diverse cultures. And over that experience, I grew a commitment to doing modestly what I might be able to do to enhance the relations between Australia and the countries and the peoples of Africa. For me, Africa represents the future. It's perhaps easier for me to talk about this in my residence in Perth, in Western Australia, that looks out over the Indian Ocean and has perhaps a different perspective than other places in Australia. I know of the path that Australia has taken in quite recent history to engage in Africa. About 10 years ago, we had a fabulous foreign minister called Stephen Smith, who really set a path for Australia, grew a diplomatic presence in Africa, supported particularly the Resources Centre as they engaged with Africa. So these were very nascent steps in my country's engagement in the continent, but I would like to think that people understand now, particularly with the incoming government, that Africa is important to us. It has the potential to enrich on a human level and an economic level, and it's something that we should seriously look at. In Western Australia as well, a particularly Western Australian perspective, we have 3 members of the African diaspora that's part of the Western Australian State Parliament. So a growing representation of the African diaspora in Australia. And you're starting to see that as well in political context, in a sporting context, in an intellectual context, in a literary context. Sisonke Muzamang is now a resident of Perth in Western Australia, a published author and a brilliant one at that. So for me, there is perhaps a different perspective coming from my city here in Perth, but also as Australia now, which is, I think, really deepened its engagement with our region over the last 20 or 30 years. We are now coming to a point where it is intelligent for us to diversify in terms of our trade relationships. And as part of that, international education also needs to be diversified. So we have perhaps a broader base of relationships. And I do see that an engagement with Africa would be beneficial to that diversification, which is why I think that summits like this, and having an Australian voice at a summit like this, is for us as Australians very important, because ultimately I would like to see the students of Africa who are looking to study internationally think of Australia as a destination of choice. Also, I think it's not, it wouldn't be frivolous to say that we are now in an era of geostrategic competition. There are, I guess, attempts to try and exert an influence to develop relationships, and without wanting to forego the agency of African peoples, governments and countries. But I think it's important for Australia to also contribute to a diplomatic optionality, to give, I guess, a choice for partners. And as an Australian, I think we do have some potential to contribute as partners to the development on a human level, rather than perhaps on a level of physical infrastructure. So I think Australia would like to be involved and has the potential to be involved in some positive developments, and education is a fantastic way to build that relationship. One, because there are benefits clearly on both sides, but also because international education, as I said before, by nature, helps develop an intercultural understanding, our understanding of diverse cultures, peoples, countries in Africa, but also an understanding of those students who arrive in Australia of our distinct history, culture, and context. I was asked to talk a little bit as well about how Australia could potentially go about enhancing our relationships in Africa. So talking very specifically about policy settings that could potentially encourage a deeper engagement, a deeper two-way engagement between our two peoples. And I think for those who don't know, Australia had, there was an election, a federal election in Australia this year. There was a change of government and the party, I guess, that was initially protagonist or helped develop, forged an engagement with Africa 10 years ago, has now been returned to government. And with that, I think, comes the opportunity to build on some of the work that was done around a decade ago. It's very important for Australia, of course, to maintain a focus and discipline in our international relations. We're not a large country. We have to, of course, be intelligent and disciplined about where we're putting our resource, our intellectual resource, our policy rigor, our attention in terms of funding, partnerships. But I think, and this new government, this new Labor government has made it clear that it will have a focus on the Pacific. It will return Australia's policy settings to what we see as our strategic hinterland of Southeast Asia to complement more traditional relationships in East Asia with Japan, China, on an economic level with Korea, and also the growing relationship that we have on many levels with India. But I nonetheless think there is a really strong argument to deepen our engagement with Africa on a diplomatic level, on an economic level, and certainly, and most enrichingly, on a human level. There are some basic steps, in my opinion, that could help aid and abet this objective, or the attainment of this objective. And I'm confident the new Australian government will take these steps. If I was to proffer an opinion about how this could be achieved, I think firstly, and retrospectively, it has happened, the appointment of an Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, a gentleman who goes by the name of Honourable Tim Watts, is a very good sign, because this opens the door for an enlargement of Australian diplomacy, of which Africa, I think, will be a part. So we have the usual protagonists in our international engagement, led by the Prime Minister, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Defence. And because of Australia's renewed commitment with this new government to the environment and climate change, I think the Minister for the Environment will also play an important role, someone by the name of Minister Tanya Plibersek, in Australia's international relations. But having an Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, I think, offers the opportunity for Australia to, yes, be very disciplined in our approach in terms of our traditional relationships, our strategic hinterland in Southeast Asia, but also look very closely about the future. And for me, Africa is going to be an important part of not only Australia, but the world's future. Secondly, I think Australia should vigorously pursue important instruments of exchange, such as the Australia Awards, and use the Australia Awards as an instrument of engagement with Africa. Such a simple step would be, in my opinion, a really important signal that we do, as Australian, as a country, want to deepen our level of engagement with Africa. And that would offer opportunities for students of the different countries of Africa to engage in Australia. And, as I said before, that would lead to a level of intercultural understanding, network, that I think will pay extreme dividends, or great dividends, in the future. I wanted to be a little bit more expansive in our thinking. We could also complement this step with a more ambitious program, like the new Colombo Plan, using that as a model, but have it focused on Africa. For those who don't know, the original Colombo Plan, which took place after the Second World War, was an Australian policy, and not just limited to Australia, but Australia certainly participated in it. We received a lot of students from Asia in Australia. And those networks ultimately were extremely important as Australia deepened its engagement with the region in the second half of the 20th century. Students came over to Australia at the time. Many of them lived in Australian households. They were billeted. They studied in Australian universities. And that grew, I think, the two-way understanding, the two-way intercultural understanding, as well as the networks that were really important for Australia as we deepened our relationship in the region. Now, if that sort of thing was applied to Africa through the Australian rewards or similar, I think that would be extremely important. But under the previous coalition government, they also developed the new Colombo Plan, which sent Australian students to study in Asia. And again, it was Australian students who had this extraordinary opportunity to live and to study in the countries of Asia, immerse themselves in the language, cultural context, and bring those understandings and that network back to Australia. A really fabulous piece of policy that has evolved and improved over what is now almost a decade. Now, if we were to apply that sort of program to Africa, so that there was a two-way exchange of students between Australia and the countries of Africa, I think that would be extraordinarily positive. Third, I think Australia would benefit from an Australia-Africa Council, which would provide an important avenue through which the government could remain informed, guided, deepen our understanding at a very high level by a council of experts with expertise in Africa and the different countries, cultures, political contexts in Africa, but also have links to Australia. And I think developing such a council would be a really positive step for Australia. But once again, it would also, I think, be a signal that we are serious in a long-term engagement in Africa, which I believe personally that would be very important. Fourth, I think Australia could further increase our diplomatic footprint, continuing the work of protagonists like Stephen Smith, as former foreign minister, and that would allow, I think, and facilitate a deeper level of engagement with the various countries and governments in Africa. I think in Australia, we tend to, like a lot of Western countries, we think in monoliths, but we also have to respect the extraordinary diversity of your continent, the sheer number of countries in the 50s that we need to, with which we need to engage. So I think increasing our diplomatic footprint would be a very positive thing. But finally, I think this could also be some contribution in partnership through funding, which could positively contribute in a true sense of partnership to the development of this expansive and wonderful continent. We do that in a way that would also enhance Australia's reputation. I think the level of engagement, sincerity with which we would hope to, again, in a very intercultural way, share what knowledge and experience that we have that could be beneficial to another people, and also have a deeper understanding that we can take back to Australia. In the areas in which I've been involved previously, in which I'm involved now, particularly in the care sectors, whether it be aged care and childcare, I think what I saw in Africa, and as my understanding of the continent and its diverse cultures grows, the very collective approach, I think, is something that unfortunately in Western societies, including Australia, we've moved away from a collective approach to care to a more individualistic society. I don't think that that's really in our interest. I think now we're starting to see some of the issues that that's caused. And I think interacting with collectivist cultures such that we have seen, or I've seen in my experience in Africa, I think would be beneficial to our country, and also that ongoing engagement, exchange, knowing that there is more than one path, there is more than one way to achieve something, and how can we learn from other people's in a way that would also be very good for us. I think there is certainly that opportunity to achieve that through a deepening engagement with Africa. I personally now am working as managing director to an organisation called Miles Morgan Australia. It's a consultancy and implementation firm that's around 25 years old now. We work largely in the care sectors, aged care, childcare, disability care. And we do have the opportunity, I think, to leverage our knowledge, experience, intellectual property to contribute to these areas, these sectors in Africa, in a true spirit of partnership with government, with education institutions, and so on. So in my professional life, I'm committed to modestly contributing to the deepening of engagements in a way that does have a mutual benefit and will, contribute to the sharing of wealth, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of experience. Because I truly think that those sort of relationships, if we can conduct the relationships in the spirit of mutual benefit, in the spirit of learning one from the other, then this will hold us in good stead. Finally, I think that to return to the subject of this summit, education is so fundamentally important. It benefits not only students in terms of the degrees that they can win, but also the understanding they come from being in an immersion situation, from the networks that you develop internationally. So it should be encouraged to the extent possible by all countries. I do understand that there is sensitivities around the possibility of people leaving a country, contributing to another, but I think those countries that have confidence in their destiny, a confidence in their national project, will develop students that do want to go overseas, do want to develop their understanding, but also want to return to their home countries and contribute to the national project. I think it's very important. I think it should be encouraged, and I think it will be an important part of Australia's future. And anything that I could possibly do to contribute to that, such as speaking on occasions like this, I would find to be very much worthwhile and inspiring, and also a very great privilege. So congratulations to those that have organised this really important summit. Any African students coming to Australia, I hope that you will feel welcomed. Maybe you consider Australia as being a destination of choice, and I hope to see you one day in Perth, Western Australia, my hometown, as we work together to try and make give the next generation the opportunities of a better life and enriching experience such as that which we will have. I've had as an international student, and hopefully those who are attending this summit will also have in the future. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you all soon.